Good afternoon and welcome to the CLEAR webinar series. I am Dave Dixon coming to you from the Middlesex County Extension Center in Haddam, Connecticut. The topic of today's webinar is Connecticut's new MS4 permit, what's new? And today's webinar is going to be presented by yours truly as well as Chet Arnold, who is the director of the Center for Land Use Education and Research. And sort of Mike Dietz, although he won't be talking, he sort of participated in developing the webinar and is very much involved in this program. So first, just to give you sort of some background on the webinar series and on our center, this is the 5th presentation in the 2016 series. You can see those shadowed out webinars have already been held and are now archived on our website, which is clear.uconn.edu. And you can go back and relive or watch those for the first time. And of course, if you have signed up for the MS4 Stormwater Permit What's New webinar, that is the webinar that we are doing today. We have one more scheduled so far this year, and that is Groundwater in Connecticut, which will be held November 9th at 2 o'clock. And we'll have registration up on our website soon for that one. Okay, so for those of you who are new to our center, we are the Center for Land Use Education and Research at UConn, which is a collaboration between the Departments of Extension, Natural Resources and the Environment, and the Sea Grant program here at UConn. We focus on 3 primary areas: water, land use and climate adaptation, and geospatial technology. And within those 3 sort of topical areas, we do some landscape research, development of geospatial technology and tools, as well as good old-fashioned extension education. And sort of where the 3 of those things meet is where CLEAR exists and provides support to communities throughout the state. And you can learn more about our center at our website, which I've said probably 4 times already, clear.uconn.edu, so you won't forget. Okay, just a little bit about the presenters for today. The guy on the left of your screen there, the handsome chrome dome gentleman, is myself. And the hairy guy in the middle, the one that's not made of Legos, is Chet Arnold. And the guy on the right, not quite as good looking chrome dome guy, is Mike Dietz. And he's sort of just appearing in spirits today. And just a little bit of a thank you and a little bit of background on our partnership with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection here in Connecticut. DEEP is funding this webinar and sort of all of our support activities related to the new MS4 permit. We have a memorandum, an agreement with them for the next 5 years to provide support to MS4 towns, and we're going to be detailing how we're going to do that through this webinar. And we just got rolling about 3 weeks ago on this partnership, so a lot of the stuff is going to be sort of coming soon. Okay, with that, I am going to turn it over to Chet Arnold to take us into our first part of today's webinar.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, the good news is Dave's already taken care of that, so we're already on to the second part, so I hope you're feeling good about that. So we're going to do a brief introduction to stormwater and the MS4 permit. Really, numbers 3 and 4 are the focus of this webinar today, but yeah, we found that it never hurts to kind of get back to basics. Oh, here's a poll. Okay, so David, I have no idea how to run this.
Okay.
So we're interested who's in the audience, and this is more to get you used to answering the polls. This is strictly to keep you awake, but we still want to know who you represent.
Here are the results.
Okay, so not unexpectedly, more than half of you are from the regulated community. And then we have some regulators, academicians, and of course private sector people. So that's just good information for us, maybe good information for you to know too. So welcome, everybody. So a couple of quick slides about stormwater. We know this isn't a Stormwater 101 lecture yet. As I said, sometimes it helps to get down to just the very basics, and so we have a couple of quick slides. This is a couple of kind of axiomatic things to pronounce, and the first one would be that stormwater runoff is really a function of land use, whether it's rural land use, it absorbs most of the water, or maybe rural land use it doesn't because it's got bad soil, to our suburban landscapes, which cover so much of Connecticut, to our more urban areas. The function, the quality, and the quantity of our stormwater is related to land use. I think we can all agree on that. And one of the things, as Dave said, CLEAR is one of our foundational studies is Connecticut's changing landscape, which looks over a long period of time, now 30 years of the entire state, and in this case also we're showing Long Island. So you're hovering above New Jersey somewhere looking down. We chart the changes to Connecticut's landscape over time, and you can probably guess, even if you're not familiar with the study, that the green areas are forest, the red areas are development, and if you can see the yellow areas, those are the turf and grass areas. So if we look at the development footprint as being development plus the highly related turf and grass, which has many similar characteristics, in 2015, our latest year, we have 954 square miles. Now we're talking about 5,000 approximately square miles of Connecticut's area. So 954 square miles. It's in our developed class, which is our remotely sensed class. It's mostly development. And about half that much, a little less than half that much in our turf and grass, which would cover all of Middlesex County plus an extra town. And as we know, when I say developed class, that's largely characterized by large amounts of impervious surfaces, so asphalt, rooftops, concrete, and things that shed water and change the nature of the water cycle. And to show you this, we're going to show an oldie but goodie slide, and then we promise there won't be any more graphs. So if we look at a cheesy little animated rain cloud, and then in a non-urban situation, and we're looking at the rate of flow on the vertical axis and time during and after, or before, during, and after a rainfall. So flow during, say, a small stream. You can see, and I'll do it again because I've been talking too much, it goes up slowly. At first it doesn't go up at all as the rainfall is absorbed into the ground. Then it goes up slowly, showing in the stream, and then slowly going back down. And what this so-called hydrograph looks like in an urban environment is quite different. So it goes up, shoots up right away. There's no waiting period, if you will. The flow is much greater, and it occurs much faster. So you have more runoff arriving faster through the drainage system, whether that be natural or storm drains. And that kind of is the bottom line in terms of the water quality and the water quantity impacts of stormwater runoff, which is why we have this regulation. So now, adding all of that, adding insult to injury, we have climate change. You see a lot of headlines like this. This one is from Long Island, just south of us, but there are several that I could have used from Connecticut, don't know why I didn't, that say historic, use things like historic rainfall or unprecedented or unseen levels. And we see a lot of that. And what we know, we don't know everything, but just using national data for a change, this is from the National Climate Assessment. In general, many parts of the United States, demarked by the blue-green areas there, have been getting more precipitation than they have historically. So this is long-term data. If you can look at the graphs, actually, let's zoom into the Northeast. So starting with the 1990s all the way kind of to the 1900s to the 1990s, and then looking at the last couple of 10 or 20 years, it looks like we're getting more precipitation than we have in the past. It also looks like we're getting, and actually even more solid research backing the fact that we're getting more heavy precipitation. So what some people like to call rain bombs, those little storms that may not have hit 3 towns to the west of you, but they hit you and you get a tremendously damaging rainstorm. And if you look, the Northeast is by far the leader in the data that shows that we're getting heavier precipitation events. So as we look at a stylishly selected group of stormwater geysers, if you just Google stormwater geysers, I highly recommend that. We can see that the whole stormwater issue is actually quite important. It's getting worse because of our climate issue, and so it's something that we have to deal with. So our second poll is, as we move into the MS4, you've been waiting 10 minutes now until we really mention that word, is what does MS4 stand for, which I think we're really interested to see. So you see the choices here. I don't want to take your time up by reading them for you, so we'll wait just a few seconds for people to respond. What do we got?
Here's your results.
Boy, you guys are good. So those of you know that it stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. I'm surprised there aren't more wise guys out there choosing some of the other choices. So I know we have a serious audience, so I'm going to remove all the rest of my joke slides from our presentation. So A very little history is that the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System was created as part of the Clean Water Act in 1972, so that's a system to track point sources and to limit the discharges from point sources. The categories in that program are in the little box on the right, and you can see stormwater is included. Around about 1990, they did add the stormwater. That's when it was included in the so-called MS4 Phase 1. That applied to larger urban areas over 100,000 in population. And then a little bit later, 1999 to 2000, implemented a few years later, came the MS4 Phase 2 program, which is really the one for the most part that we're talking about, although the general permit has been revised now in 2016, and that's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the time. So if you look at the map of this, you have Stanford, which was our only MS4 Phase 1 program, and congratulations, Stanford. And that is a surprise to some people. And then all these other light orange ones are the ones that have been in the program, and you know who you are. Many of you are on. And then maybe some of you are from the 8 new towns that were added as part of the update. So there they are. We're not going to go into them specifically, but welcome to the crowd. If you want to know exactly what towns there are, a list of them is in Appendix A of the actual permit, which is available on the DEP website. I'm going to show you where that is in case you don't know where that is at the end of the presentation. So now onto the key new provisions and the difference between the old MS4 and the new MS4. Dave?
Okay, thanks, Chet. Broke the microphone. Right. So first of all, in terms of what hasn't changed in the new permit is the big 6, which are the minimum control measures, which is really what drives the general permit, as those of you who have done it know. There's basically 6 categories of things that communities must do to comply with the permit: public education and outreach, public participation, IDDE, which is illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site runoff, post-construction stormwater management, and then pollution prevention, which is also sometimes called good housekeeping. And so those are still the same 6 minimum control measures, and that's the same pretty much in every state that you go to under this program. Also, what hasn't changed is sort of the basic requirements. You have to register as an MS4 with the state DEP. You have to develop a stormwater management plan that lays out what you're going to do under each of those 6 minimum control measures. And then you have to implement that plan and file annual reports about how you're doing in terms of doing what you said you were going to do in your plan. And then finally, some water quality monitoring requirements in terms of tracking the actual impacts on water quality. And so moving then to the new permit, the biggest change is really that the new permit is much more detailed, focused, and specific sort of than the old permit. And just as an example, the old permit was 17 pages with very just sort of general requirements, and the new permit is 68 pages with very specific requirements of what communities will do, and also sort of more of a focus on doing it in particular areas, as we'll see. So because this is so much more detailed, and I don't want to put you all to sleep this afternoon and get lost in the weeds, so we're going to try to just give you sort of a very broad view of the changes in the new permit without sort of getting into all the little specific nitty-gritty details, but we can follow up with you on those at a later date. Okay, so first of all, in terms of the scope of the activities, where do these things that we're going to lay out for you in a minute, where do they have to be done? Well, under the old permit, pretty much everything was town-wide, except for a couple things. A couple things only had to be done in the urbanized area. And so you can see in this image of Burlington, Connecticut on the right, the whole town is highlighted in orange, and then the little blue areas are the urbanized area. And so there's some things that only had to be done in those urbanized areas. And parts of that were the illicit discharge detection and elimination program, as well as street sweeping. So that was the old permit. Things have changed a bit in the new permit. But first, I will just say, in some cases, this urbanized area versus town-wide distinction is a distinction without a difference. If you are a community that is entirely an urbanized area, like Shelton and many of our other communities, you basically have to do it in the whole town. So, Anyway, moving on to the new permit. By default, if it's not mentioned in the permit, everything has to be done townwide. So this is an image of Vernon. So if it doesn't say do it in a particular area, then you have to do it townwide. However, now in trying to DEP and trying to sort of focus those efforts on sort of the hardest hit areas or the areas that are experiencing the most trouble, they want you to focus efforts on these sort of priority areas. And priority areas are, again, urbanized areas, which is the same as it was in the old permit. But there's two new areas that they want you to focus on. One is any outfall to an impaired water, and sort of that whole watershed of that outfall. That's one of the priority areas. Third is any sort of outfall or catchment area with directly connected impervious area, which we will break down for you in a couple slides, that is greater than 11%. If you have one of those catchment areas, then you have to do certain activities in those areas as well. So just remember that, because throughout we're going to be talking about these things have to be done in priority areas. And so those are the three sort of categories of priority areas. So what are the things that actually have to be done in priority areas as opposed to having to be done in the whole town? So this is kind of a quick list of what those are. One of them is IDDE, is focused on priority areas. You also have to develop stormwater pond maintenance plans in those areas, as well as maintenance for other stormwater treatment structures. Disconnection retrofits are to be focused in those priority areas, which is kind of disconnecting impervious cover from emptying into the storm drain system. There's also annual street and parking lot sweeping, which has to be done so every single year, basically after the last snowfall or last winter event. There has to be street and parking lot sweeping in those priority areas. Outside of the priority areas, you still have to do it. You just have to develop a schedule that makes sense based on the amount of stuff going on in those areas, basically. And then the other big thing is catch basin inspection. You have to do that by the end of year 3 for priority areas, and then you have a little bit more time to do it outside of the priority areas until the end of year 5 of the permit. And so the end of year 3 basically takes us through, the permit becomes effective next year, so it basically takes us through 2020, and the end of year 5 takes us through 2022. And then also, this is not necessarily all of those categories of priority areas, but just in those outfalls to impaired waters, you also have to do screening or water quality monitoring of sort of what's happening in those impaired waters. Okay, so getting to that directly connected impervious area calculation thing that I mentioned. So, of course, as many of you on the call know, all impervious area is not the same. So there is directly connected impervious area, which is really what we're concerned about, in that any runoff that falls on that hard surface or that impervious surface is going to go directly into a storm drain, which then goes into your local water body. So that is directly connected, because any runoff that falls on that is going to go into the storm drain. Contrasted with disconnected, which is basically, this is an example in this picture here, where this gutter downspout goes into a grassy area where any stormwater that falls on that roof and goes through that pipe is going to infiltrate into the ground. So it's not going into that storm sewer system. So that is disconnected. So that's not considered to be part of the directly connected impervious area. And in terms of water quality, the thing that we're concerned about the most is that directly connected impervious area. And so that's why this permit sort of makes that distinction and asks town to sort of figure out where that directly connected impervious area is. And so within the permit, you do have to calculate directly connected impervious area. You have to, for any outfall that you have to a water body from your storm water system, you have to delineate that sort of watershed of that outfall. So figure out how many storm drains and how much area is sort of feeding that one outfall. And then within that, you have to calculate how much impervious cover is within that little sort of watershed. And then from that impervious cover, you have to determine how much of that impervious cover is directly connected. So this is going to be new for everybody in terms of figuring this out. And it's one of the things that we're going to sort of try to help towns figure out different methods to do. But there are different ways you can do this. One is using sort of GIS and doing a little bit of field testing to test out the results of your GIS. That's one way of doing it. Another, and this is sort of what's recommended in the permit, is a little bit easier, may not be as exact, but is an estimation method. And so DEEP has on their website this DCIA estimation chart, where there's two different ways where you can determine how much DCIA is in a particular area or catchment area. And so here you can see there's two options. One is where you just plug in how much impervious cover you have, and you multiply it by these different factors, and then you get a percentage of DCIA. And so this is sort of the quick and dirty way to figure out generally how much directly connected impervious area you have in a watershed or catchment area. Okay, so that we got a little bit too much into the weeds there, but to pull back out and sort of look at each of the individual 6 minimum control measures and what are the changes within each of these 6 measures. So we'll go through these. So first of all, the first one is public education. And so the difference now is that it used to be very general in terms of just providing general stormwater public education to the community, and now we're focused more on some required topics like pet waste, fertilizer, herbicides, and pesticides, impervious cover and the impacts of impervious cover on water quality, as well as focusing on illicit discharges. Also, a new thing is that they sort of encourage regional collaboration. So if you want to work with your COG or with some of your neighboring towns to develop one website that has a bunch of this public education on it, and then refer your public to that, that is definitely okay under this permit. So that should help make things a little bit easier. And I know there's a lot of COGs who are already working in that direction. Additionally, there are additional topics. If you have an impairment in your community for nitrogen, phosphorus, bacteria, or mercury, there are additional public education requirements and topics that you have to provide. So just check out what those impairments are in your community if you don't know them already, and then figure out what you have to do as a result of that. Okay, second is public involvement and participation. This is, there's not any big changes in this one. You still have to involve the public in your stormwater management plan. One of the differences is you now have to provide annual notice. So every single year you have to let the community know that you have a stormwater management plan and that you have annual reports on that stormwater management plan. And you have to do that by January 31st each year. So that's just general public notice. And there's also a required 30-day comment period. So, and that's the same when you file your stormwater management plan. There's also a required comment period. So every time you put it out there, you have to provide an opportunity for the community to comment on those plans and reports. Okay, so now getting into IDDE, which is illicit discharge detection and elimination. Basically, the change here is that the program is much more detailed in terms of what you are required to do and focused in terms of focusing on those priority areas. And so it only has to be, it's only required at a minimum in those priority areas. So the urbanized areas, again, where DCIA is greater than 11% and where there are impaired water bodies. And so that should help at least some towns that where that may leave out part of your community that you don't have to do this in. But every community has to develop a written program for illicit discharge detection and elimination. There is a protocol in the back of the permit that sort of lays out every step and all the things that you have to do to comply with IDDE. So that should help in developing that written program. You also have to develop a citizen reporting program. To allow communities, members of the community to, if they find illicit discharges, to report that, whether that be through a phone hotline or through a mobile app or something like that. There's a lot of different ways that communities in other states have done that. There's also expanded local legal authority. Under the old permit, there was the requirement that every town develop a legal authority to implement their IDDE program. But now there's sort of a little bit more that you have to do. So you have to add to that legal authority if you already have it in place, including the requirement that you add in the ability to add penalties to folks who are basically discharging unlawfully to the system. Finally, you have to map all of your outfalls under the IDDE program. So it used to be that you only had to do outfalls that were greater than 15-inch pipes. but now you have to do all outfalls to water bodies from your stormwater system.
All outfalls in the priority areas, right?
Yes, in the priority areas, sorry. I believe. We'll have to go back and check on that one for sure, but I think it's in the priority areas. And then finally, there's more of a concern about septic systems now under this permit and under IDDE. If you have septic systems and you have impairments for phosphorus, nitrogen, or bacteria, there's extra things that you have to do under the IDDE part of the permit. Okay, moving on to construction site runoff. Again, here you have to expand your legal authority, so your ordinances or whatever you have to enforce runoff from a construction site. And so now what is required is you have to require that a developer or a contractor maintain consistency with 3 different things. One is the Connecticut Stormwater Quality Manual. The second is all other deep stormwater permits, general permits and otherwise that DEEP has involving stormwater, as well as the 2002 Soil Erosion and Sedimentation Control Guidelines. So that all has to be sort of built into the legal authority that your community has. You also have to provide in those regulations for inspections so that folks from your community can go out and inspect those construction sites and make sure that there's no problems there. And you also have to require that the contractors or developers enter into a long-term maintenance plan for any stormwater runoff from that site and ensure that they comply with that plan. There's also requirements for inspection review sort of related to that, what I just talked about. Basically, you have to, when you're reviewing a site plan, look at the stormwater impacts and consider that and whether or not the site plan should be approved or not. You also must inspect sites. So once a site is up and running, during the installation, make sure that things are happening as they're supposed to, as well as inspecting for maintenance sort of going forward. And all of that piece of it, the inspection and review, that is required starting July 1st, 2017. So basically, 7-8 months from now, you have to start doing that. Although the regulatory authority, I think you have a couple years under the permit to sort of get that passed. The other requirement under construction site runoff is notification. So you have to develop a procedure for letting the public provide input or report if they see construction sites that have problems. You have to set up a way for, again, the community to report that. And you also have to develop a procedure for notifying developers of their potential obligations under the construction general permit that DEEP has also issued. And so that's not in every case that a developer has to comply with that, but in the cases where they do, the community does have to sort of provide a way for the developers to make sure that they check that and are in compliance with it. Okay, so moving on to number 5, only 2 more to go, is post-construction runoff, and this is where low-impact development, or LID, is really sort of ramped up in this permit. And so one of the things that communities have to do is integrate LID into their land use regulations. And so one of the requirements here is that low-impact development be considered as sort of the first approach to dealing with stormwater from a site. And so before you consider other ways to deal with stormwater, they want you to consider low-impact development first. And so you have to integrate that into your regulations, that's sort of the first step for developers or contractors on a site. You also have to ensure that, at a minimum, any low-impact development plans that are developed for a particular site are consistent with the Connecticut Stormwater Quality Manual. You also have to go through your regulations and eliminate any barriers to LID, or at least reduce them. And so, for example, in some land use regulations, you may require parking islands that are surrounded by curbs. And if you require that, then that doesn't allow for things like creating infiltration. So it's creating an innie island instead of an outie island type thing, where that water can sort of run off that parking lot and into the island and then absorb into the ground. So you have to make sure that you're not preventing in your regulations those types of things from happening. In addition, you now have to retain the water quality volume on site in certain circumstances. So if you are redeveloping a site with greater than 40% directly connected impervious area, you have to retain, or not you, but the developer has to retain half of the runoff volume off of that site. That's based on a 1-inch storm. And then if it's a development or redevelopment of a site that's less than 40% directly connected impervious area, you have to retain, or the developer has to retain, all of the runoff volume from that site for a 1-inch storm. So these are new requirements, and so it's going to be a new thing that you have to include in your land use regulations. And if the developer or contractor cannot meet those requirements, they have to provide the equivalent amount of runoff reduction elsewhere, so on some other site. And so it's kind of left open as to how that actually will happen. That is one of the requirements. They have to find a way, or they pay somebody else to put in some bioretention or other LID features somewhere else to be able to get to that amount of runoff volume that they're reducing from the system. Also under post-construction runoff, just some quick things. Again, concern for septic systems and sort of the connection between septic systems and LID design. If you're having all this infiltration, you don't want it to harm septic systems, and you don't want septic systems to harm the LID functions. So you have to coordinate LID design with the public health official and make sure that it's not going to be interfering with any septic systems, and that's consistent with state standards for how those systems are developed. This is also the place where that directly connected impervious area first appears in the permit, and this is where it requires that you have to calculate DCIA for every outfall in your community, and again, the priority areas. And then in terms of maintenance of post-construction, there has to be a maintenance plan for stormwater ponds and other treatment structures in the priority areas. Okay, so the last category is pollution prevention. There's a lot of goodies in here in terms of what has to be done. And this is related to the directly connected impervious area thing, where basically communities now have to develop a program to disconnect some of the impervious cover in their communities. And so the requirement is that communities start reducing directly connected impervious area by 1% per year starting after the 3rd year of the permit, so starting in year 4. So basically in 2020, you have to start reducing impervious cover connections. There is, however, a 5-year look back that dates from when the permit becomes effective. So generally anything that you have done to disconnect impervious cover from the stormwater system from July 1st, 2012 going forward, you can take credit for all of that in terms of reducing your directly connected impervious area. Towns also have to develop a retrofit prioritization plan where you sort of identify areas where you can disconnect impervious area and develop sort of a prioritization of what will come first. And that plan has to be developed again by 2020. So moving on, also within the pollution prevention category, there's a lot of things that have to be done in terms of municipal operations, in terms of safeguarding water quality. There's a variety of things here, from reducing or eliminating lawn fertilization on town fields to disposing properly of grass clippings and leaf litter. There's also, taking care of pet waste management in public areas. So if you have, a park with a, water body that gets emptied into, then to provide facilities for managing pet waste. Also, there's provisions in there for discouraging things like waterfowl or Canadian geese or ducks that also cause a problem for water quality. And so the idea there is to educate the public about not feeding those animals and encouraging to come to the banks of water bodies, but also to implement other procedures as well to discourage the Canadian geese and other birds coming to your facilities. There also are requirements for spill prevention to make sure that any spills don't happen, or if they do, are contained properly. There's requirements in here for what to do with salt and sand and how to properly apply them as well as store them. And if you have impairments for nitrogen, phosphorus, or bacteria, there are additional requirements that you have to comply with in terms of your municipal operations. Also, in terms of catch basin cleaning, you have to, in the priority areas, all catch basins have to be inspected within the first 3 years of the permit. And that's, again, just in those priority areas. but all catch basins have to be inspected by the end of the permit term, which is basically within 5 years, so the end of 2022. And if any of those catch basins are more than 50% full, which this one you see in the picture is way more than 50% full, they have to be cleaned out. So they can never be more than 50% full. So that's sort of the cleaning regimen that you would have to go through for the catch basins. Another requirement is street sweeping. This again applies specifically to priority areas. Streets and parking lots have to be done every spring, basically, again, after that last winter storm or after that last winter maintenance that you do, all the streets and parking lots have to be swept. For those areas that are outside of the priority areas, you still have to do it in those areas. You just have to develop a plan or a schedule for when you're going to accomplish that. So then the last sort of new thing in terms of the permit is water quality monitoring, which was required in the old permit, but there's some sort of new requirements here. You have to inventory all outfalls now. It used to be there's basically 6 different outfalls that you had to, in different areas that you had to monitor, and now it's all outfalls that empty into impaired waters have to be monitored. You have to screen for whatever the pollutant of concern is for that impaired water body. And you also have to do follow-up investigations to sort of develop a record of how that water is being impacted. Okay, so before we get on to our next poll, we do have a bunch of questions here that we're going to try to answer. So first question is there a list for the institutions? I do not believe there is a list. DEEP may have one. I have not seen a list. There's not a list in the permit of what the institutions are, but basically the institutions that are now part of the permit are all state and federal institutions that operate their own MS4 system. So our campus, the University of Connecticut campus in Storrs, as well as Avery Point and other campuses, do fall under that category. So our own folks are also doing their own MS4 permit.
So we'll find out if there is a list, but we have not seen one.
Right. Let me see if I can expand these questions here. What about, let's pull this up. What about the towns not included in the MS4 program? What is currently being done to invite these towns to participate? Well, under this sort of outreach program that Chet's going to outline for you in a minute, all of the things that we're providing are available to all the towns. So if there are towns who want to start doing this because they're concerned that the next time this comes around they're going to be included, they can definitely participate in all of the resources that we provide and sort of get a jump start on things. But as of now, they are not required to do anything under the permit. And that sort of is a change from what was originally proposed.
Previous webinars, just go to the CLEAR homepage.
Oh, yeah.
So look for webinars. There's a webinar library off of the CLEAR homepage.
Okay. And I just heard from DEEP that they do not yet have a list of institutions. They're in the process of compiling that. When you say the outfalls have to be screened, do you mean the outfalls that discharge directly to the water body? Yes. I believe the answer to that one is yes, but I'll follow up and make sure that that's the case. Will this PowerPoint be available so we can get a copy of it? Yes. So this, as I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded, so you can watch it again. We will also make this PowerPoint available on our website for folks to sort of flip through and get more of a sense of those changes. Is a parking garage considered a building under the permit? Assuming that that parking garage does not have a green roof, it would be considered a structure, and so it would be considered impervious cover. And so that would be included in sort of that DCIA calculation. Is there an exemption from disconnect for houses in a National Register Historic District? I don't think so. There's nothing in the permit about that. I don't know if there's other federal regulations regarding National Register Historic District homes. So we'd have to look into that. But in the permit itself, there's nothing about that, or about National Register neighborhoods either. Water, yes, retain water quantity on site. I think the permit actually does say water quality on site, water quality volume, but I think it means the sort of amount of water that's falling on that site. Somebody asked about that.
The water quality volume.
Yes, yeah. Has DEEP compiled sample language from municipalities that have not yet adopted enabling ordinances or regulations? I don't know if DEEP has. We have a website, and I think that Chet's going to show this at some point. We have a project that we did last year called the State of LID in Connecticut that has examples of regulations that generally promote low-impact development throughout the state, but we're also going to be developing some other examples of what communities can do. For example, the town of Mansfield has adapted an LID checklist, which really meets the requirements of the permit, in that any new development has to sort of go through this checklist and sort of say, no, we can't do this, no, we can't do this, and explain why in terms of LID before they can move on to sort of other stormwater requirements. And so that's a good model for folks to look to. Are pollution prevention measures on roads just for municipal roads? Many roads around water bodies are private. That's a good question. I do not know the answer to that,
Yeah, I don't either.
but we can look that up and find out. And if somebody's on that knows the answer to that, feel free. I think it's just for municipal roads, because if you don't have the responsibility to maintain those private roads, so I wouldn't think that those would be included. An impaired water body is another question that somebody said, what is an impaired water body? There's basically a state 303D list that lists out all of the impaired water bodies in the state and what they are impaired for. And so you can find that on the DEEP website. We are also developing some maps that highlight where those impaired water bodies are, so you can quickly go and look at your town and sort of see where those impaired water bodies are.
Mapping for that is.
Where can we find impaired water mapping for our town? Again, if you go to CT Eco, which is a website that we manage and has all of the sort of natural resource data for the state on it. So it's cteco, cteco.uconn.edu. You can find on there's several different map viewers, but the impaired waters list is on there. The only thing that's not included on there is what the actual impairment is. You can sort of see where those impaired water bodies are. There's a different list that you have to find, which is that 303D list that I mentioned, that actually lists out what the impairments are for each of those water bodies. So you have to sort of cross-compare the two of them. Inventory of all outfalls to impaired water. Can you explain what that means? That basically means that you have to identify the location and some other information about every outfall that you have in your community that goes into an impaired water body.
So there are a number of different ways to map that, and we're going to be hoping to, educate those of you that don't have your own people to do that, how you can do that using imagery that's available, or or other road surveys, windshield surveys. Also, Chris Stone from the DEEP, who many of you know, and who is the big MS4 expert, really has just weighed in to say that only municipal roads are covered for that other one.
So then another question about water quality monitoring. Do you mean visual monitoring or lab testing? And so a lot of this is field testing, using field testing monitors, which you may have to purchase for your community, or you may get a bunch of communities together and share the purchase of that equipment. But the permit really goes through by detail exactly how you have to do that water quality monitoring and in what cases you have to use different meters. And it depends, again, on the impairments of the various water bodies. To date, what issues are towns not getting or addressing when arranging with consultants for 2017 compliance? I don't know the answer to that question yet. As I mentioned, we've just gotten going with this program in the last 3 weeks or so. And one of the things that we're hoping to do in the survey that I'm hoping many of you will fill out, that you'll get in an email in about an hour after this webinar, is exactly those issues. What are the issues that towns are sort of not getting or understanding? And what sort of support is needed? Are there any grants available to offset costs to comply with these permit requirements? You want to take that one, Chet?
I would say no. I mean, many of you are familiar with the Section 319 of the Clean Water Act, the non-point source section that many towns have used to fund some similar projects having to do with stormwater runoff. But because this is technically very much a point source program, part of the NIPD's permitting system. Projects that are directly, I believe, my understanding, and again, we'll check on all this, projects directly supportive of these types of activities wouldn't be eligible under that. I think that is the, 12,000-pound elephant in the room, is that many of this controlling stormwater does take resources. It's very important, and yet other areas of the country have been diving into funding mechanisms that Connecticut has not really yet dipped its toe in. So, and specifically, obviously, I'm talking about stormwater utilities, which are gaining in popularity in the country, despite the fact that in some areas there's some resistance of being called a rain tax and other things. But really, it's a utility just like anything else, a system that needs to be done for the improvement of the community. So I'm sure that those will be coming at some point, but I think it needs a lot of support. DEEP is also interested, I know, and there's some models that they know more about than we do, of stormwater utility types of things, but are basically multi-community consortium, I guess you would call that, to be able to do a lot of these things together and fund them in a much more cost efficient way. And so we can start to develop materials to educate people about some of these other funding mechanisms.
Yeah, and that really leads into sort of, part of the point of our doing this outreach is to, lessen the impact somewhat of these new requirements, to try to provide ways for communities to be able to do this, right? Providing examples and templates and tools, and that's what Chet's going to get into next. Before I turn it back over to Chet to talk about what we're going to do to try to help, we have one more poll, and this is which part of the permit, based on what I've just laid out, is the most concerning to you. So it looks like DCIA, I think I've scared you enough with the DCIA, maybe that's sort of a bias, is sort of the most concerning, and the disconnection of impervious cover are sort of the top two. But the LID regulation sort of is the least concerning. So I think a lot of communities have already taken a lead on that anyway.
That's a very interesting and good list for us to provide some guidance. And I would add to Dave's slide about DCIA is some of the methods he said are not the only methods. And he mentioned this, but I just want to emphasize that we are trying to work with COGS and the private sector and a lot of other people to look at several different ways of skinning that particular cat. It would be nice for the state and good for all of you if there weren't 50 different mechanisms to do that. But at the same time, we know there's not going to just be one. And it'll depend on what kind of GIS expertise you have, what kind of data you have, et cetera. And we're going to be working on that. It's a kind of an interesting, complex problem, so it's going to take us a little while to work through it. So I'm going to still try to get us in the next 7 minutes or so till 3 o'clock just by talking a little bit about what we're going to be doing. I may or may not quite make it. And then we're going to stay on the line until we've answered or fumbled every single question that you've asked. And you can tell that this is obviously very complex, and we don't have all the answers. In some cases there aren't answers. In some cases we just don't know them. And I would point out that I wrote down that Dave said distinction without a difference, which shows you that he is a lawyer, just by the way. So just to say, the NEMO program has been around for a very long time. In fact, we changed our official motto from linking land use to water quality back in the early 90s to schlepping to town hall since 1993. And what made us different, which are all these things we're talking about, which are now quite commonplace but very relevant to the MS4 program, is that it's an educational approach, and it's fully in recognition of the land use genesis of all of these issues. And we make heavy use of geospatial technology because we've got a lot of very smart people across the hall and down the hall from us who do that. And we've always been focused from way before it was called LID on green approaches like LID. And just to show you, I mean, the halcyon days, we were out in the towns quite a bit. Had very high recognition factor. For the last several years, we've been working on the same issues, but we have not been in the towns as much as we used to when we had 2 full-time planners who were doing all this. So we've been working on things like our Rain Garden app, Rain Garden training, and a lot of LID work on campus, which will accrue and is accruing even now to other communities. And we've never stopped going out into your towns, but we certainly haven't had quite the presence that we've had in the past. Just coming clean here. So from our viewpoint, and I think for some reason I feel it's important for you to know this out there, that the MS4 program is coming full circle for us to get back into town and have the kind of, if not ubiquitous, common presence in all of your town halls to help you deal with these issues. And this is a cheesy slide, but just to remind me to say that, at the heart of it are your communities, those of you, the 58% of you that are community people, but we understand there are lots of other players, and we are the educational component to some extent, but there are other educational components and other people that are going to be able to help you to comply with this regulation. The COGS, there are many COGS that have already got out to a fast start, providing services for you, their member towns. There are private sector companies. We know a lot of private sector companies that have already been out talking to the COGS and talking to individual towns about doing pieces of this new regulation. And then there are NGOs out there, and of course DEEP as the regulatory body. So some of the things we're going to do, and again, these are all, I hate to say it's a Peace Corps type thing, helping those to help themselves, but we are an educational program, and yet we hope to create some tools and resources that will really help you directly respond to this regulation. The kind of grand central station of all this will be a website. As Dave has mentioned, that we just got off the board about 3 weeks ago, so we do not yet have a website. I think this is the first webinar I've ever done where I can not refer people to our website. But it's going to be, we've already started working on it. It's going to be organized around the 6 minimum control measures, and we're going to front load it with things as they are imminent in the permit. So the stormwater management plan is one of the things that's just around the corner, virtually speaking, and we're going to be focusing on that. But it will have a lot of the different resources that I'm going to mention in the next couple of slides. You'll be able to get them all from the MS4 website. We hope to get a prototype with some real information on it by early December, I would say, really just about a month and a half from now. One of the big things is what some people like to call a circuit rider. I'm not sure where that term ever came from, but it wasn't from us. But we are going to have a full-time person dedicated to dealing with communities and helping them deal with these regulations. And we've just been through a job search. We're very excited. It is not concluded yet, but we hope we are going to wrap that up pretty soon and have a person to add to the team. And then if you look at the upper right-hand corner, not only just education and coming in and doing presentations for you and your constituents and your commissions, et cetera, but we do have technical assistance that we're going to be able to provide, as I'm going to show you. And also, as Dave mentioned, trying to be somewhat of a conduit of communication between, you don't probably need it between you and the COGS, but between you and your other towns, between COGS, with your peers in other towns, and with the DEP. So we're going to be serving somewhat of an ombudsman role there. And I will say that simple obedience changes history. I don't think you can change. How can you change history?
With obedience?
I don't know. This was some kind of circuit riders back in the 1800s, and we're still researching that as well. So we have created an MS4 Listserv. For the few of you that may not know what a Listserv is out there, it's basically just an email list that's dedicated to a particular group of people who sign up to be on it. So it's not spam. It's self-initiated spam. And Dave has got the URL there. That's going to be a little difficult for you to scribble down right now. But since we don't have a website, I think what we'll do is we will post this as a PDF, as we said, the whole presentation. It will have live links in it to some of these websites that we're talking about.
There's also going to be a link for this listserv sign up in the email that you're going to get at the end of this webinar.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So you should be able to subscribe that way.
And we've already gotten a couple of very thoughtful contributions of both questions and information to people, even though it's just getting started. So that's how you do it. That's what it'll look like when you click on that link and go to the UConn Listserv kind of major domo, and there you can subscribe. You can unsubscribe, but you have to subscribe first.
Yeah.
So we're going to be doing our usual kind of, as Dave said, classic extension workshops and other webinars on various topics. And while there are a few topics on the bullets there that we may have committed to, we're certainly open to suggestion on other topics, and the type of poll that we just did on the things that concern you most. That's the kind of input we need, and the survey that Dave has suggested that you fill out. We're going to have some checklists and guides that are going to help you, because obviously this is kind of complex and many splendored thing, and these are some of the things that we plan: a stormwater management plan checklist, the old versus new requirements that Dave just went through. We're going to have those kind of more of in a tabular form than PowerPoint form. Various other timelines, because the timeline is so important. And as we work our way through the DCAI mapping, we'll have instructions. We also are taking, suggestions from you on what would be most helpful. And we realize that there are, as I said, some of the cogs have really gotten off to a great start, and some of the private sector people are all developing their own versions of some of these, and we're trying as best we can to coordinate so that there's no duplication of effort. Dave's mentioned the mapping resources. Those will all be more or less based at our share toy with DEEP, the CT Eco site that's currently administered and run pretty much out of this office at CLEAR. So we're going to have a dedicated map viewer. That's going to be a series of maps, a set of maps that are going to be directly applicable to this particular regulation. So it's kind of a subset of maps that will make it easier for you to find the kind of information you need. One of those data layers will be, it'll take us about 9 months to get it, but part of the MOU, we have subcontracted to get high-resolution impervious cover data, so that's 1 meter, and it looks a little bit like that, and I think Dave had an example of it in one of his slides, and it's a lot better than the 30-meter remote sensing, and perhaps not as good as some of you who have planimetric data for your communities, but it is a pretty high level of resolution that can be used to meet some of these requirements. We also, as I said, we have some great geospatial experts who are also expert trainers. We're going to be working with 4 pilot towns on this DCAI mapping conundrum and try to come up perhaps with a menu of different approaches. And so we're going to be working with some new towns to MS4, some older towns, some larger cities, some smaller, more rural communities. And we're working our way through that so that we can then publish and do outreach programs on the results that'll make your lives easier. We also are going to be getting that information out through workshops and video tutorials and videos on the web. We've done a lot of these in the past that can step you through some of these things. Also, we're going to try to develop some mobile tools. We mentioned the Rain Garden app before, and it's pictured there just because we have a pretty long history in this particular technology area. A long history is what, 5 years, but of creating mobile phone applications or apps. And as you probably saw, there are some requirements involving IDDE, involving citizen reporting, various things that would be very handy to have a mobile phone app that would be able to assist you when you go out into the field, or some of your citizens are out in the field, to look at these types of things in terms of the outfalls, the catch basins, and the IDE. So we're the arrival date says later because we're not sure exactly when that's going to happen, but again, we are dedicated to getting these things out to you in good time before the actual due date in the permit. So this is a slightly later one. And I think lastly, maybe not quite lastly, we are going to be putting the Stormwater Quality Manual from 2004 online. Many of you, I think most of you are familiar with it. Dave's mentioned it several times. It's mentioned specifically in the regulation. It was updated a couple of years ago with some LID information, so it's going to be helpful in that regard too. And we're going to be putting it online and making it more searchable. We're not going to be updating it topically, but we're going to be making it much more accessible to you online. And that's a fairly first-tier job for us. In fact, we have a meeting on that in a couple of weeks. So, Dave, can we skip this one?
No, come on. We want to see what people want.
It's after 3 o'clock. No? Okay, we're gonna
one more poll. And while you're filling out this poll, we can maybe look at another question or two. Okay. I am closing the poll. For those of you who were participating, these are the results. Looks like the website with all the stuff on it is people are most
and to an
about.
extent, obviously, they track the things that you're the most concerned about as well. Right. So, and again, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for input on what we can do for you. So we're done. In the meantime, since this is so new and we don't have a website, and because I don't think you ought to, we will fix this in the PDF for direct links, but in case you want to go there now, I don't think you can write down all these URLs. So I have tested carefully all of these Google phrases that work. If you want to go to the MS4 website, which you probably know already, which has a lot of red ink, but that doesn't mean that there's not good stuff there, to get either the regulation itself or a fact sheet on the general permit. Those are both there on the MS4 website. There's a lot of good stuff on the NEMO page. We'll skip that. And we do have right now a do-it-yourself site where a lot of the things that we're going to have on the eventual MS4 site are in terms of identifying impervious cover and things, in case you wanted to look at that if you Google UConn NEMO DIY. And lastly, this is what Dave mentioned. So a year ago, we did a very thorough study that included almost half, or almost exactly half, of the 169 municipalities, and we got a lot of results of LID regulations, which towns had which regulations, what were the most popular, what wasn't getting done out there, and also what the top barriers at the municipal level were to adoption of LID, and what the top motivational factors were. And so that is in the form of a paper, but it's also in the form, if you Google State of LID in Connecticut, you will get this story map, which is a new online application, really, that's enables you to combine online maps, interactive live online maps with graphs, with videos, with whatever else, pictures, whatever else you want. And so there's a really good story map that Dave and one of our interns did on that. So, Dave, do you want to?
Sure. So then, I've already mentioned it probably 3 times, but we do have this survey where we're trying to get more input from the communities in terms of the parts that are concerning and sort of what capacities you have and what you need help with. So if you go to this URL, which is s.uconn.edu/ms4needs, and again, this will be linked in an email that you'll all get after this webinar, you'll definitely help us to sort of figure out what types of things you need the most.
Right. But don't go there right now, because I think we should officially declare this webinar closed.
Yeah.
We take a lot of pride in coming in on time. We did have a lot of questions, and so we're 5 minutes late, for which I apologize. There's still 120 of you online here, and we will stick it out and try to answer as many of the remaining questions as we can. But you probably don't feel guilt, but if you do feel guilty for leaving, don't. And we will, in the next couple of weeks or so, publish a list of answers for these questions. But for now, could you find where we were?
So we're here. So the next question is, are there specifics for watershed and outfall maps to be produced? Yes, in the permit in itself, it's very detailed in terms of what you have to include in those maps and what sort of formats they have to be in. So I refer you to the permit. Once we get the website up, we'll also have sort of more digestible language that you don't have to be a lawyer to read through. What is the need for in terms of legalese, what is the need for the permit? Do towns need to apply for the permits? Well, if you are a community that is included in those that we highlighted on the map, you have to register, and in most cases, towns already have done that because they had to comply with the old permit. So you have to register, and then you have to submit a stormwater management plan. But it's already identified sort of who those communities are.
Okay, Chris.
What about farmland runoff? That's not specifically addressed within the permit, although it sort of still would fall under some of the general requirements of the permit, but there's no special section that deals with farmland or anything like that. It would just be considered in terms of all the other requirements in terms of pollution prevention and things like that.
I mean, we have the whole history of the Clean Water Act non-point source programs that have been focused in the past on farmland. That doesn't mean it's been particularly effective. Some of that is also, I think, covered by basic erosion and sedimentation control, but many TMDLs, at least around the country, if not really that many in Connecticut, relate to runoff that's generated by farmland. The fact is that suburban and urban runoff is really the major issue in terms of impairments in Connecticut, as opposed to other areas of the country, for instance. And so this program does not focus on that. What constitutes a priority area? Do you want to look that one up while I?
No. So the priority areas are those 3 things, which it's the urbanized area, which is based on the 2010 U.S. Census. So that's a defined area. And we will have a map on our website that shows you where that is in your community. In some cases, it's your entire community. The other category of priority area is where there's impaired waters and any sort of discharge to those impaired waters. That's considered to be a priority area. And then the third one, because it's the end of the webinar, I've forgotten already. Oh, the directly connected impervious area, that is greater than 11%. And so that's a determination that you're going to have to make for your community. And one thing I will say is that you do have to do that for all outfalls in your community. You have to determine that DCIA percentage.
This one refers to a previous one, which...
This is about the retention of the water quality volume.
Right. Excuse us. You mentioned more than 40% of the DCI had to retain runoff volume, but less than 40% you must retain all of it?
Yes.
That's the assumption, right? And we didn't say that specifically. That's quite true.
Right. That is true that if it's more than 40%, it's only half of the runoff volume. I believe the idea there is that it would be hard to deal with all of that runoff, but that's something that could be directed to DEEP in terms of the intent behind that.
The questioner also said this would encourage greater DCIA development. Is this correct? I'm not sure that that's true. I'd have to really think about that. I mean, because the higher the construction sites and the renewal sites with high impervious cover, it's quite expensive to disconnect that impervious cover compared to disconnecting impervious cover in lower areas and in new areas. So I think that the marketplace would actually disagree with that it really isn't. It would seem to be, you know, it's a less stringent regulation on the surface of things, but I think in terms of the way it actually plays out, complying with that regulation, it probably wouldn't be an incentive to pave over entire area. But that's an interesting point, and I think it requires a little more thought processes than I have left in my head now. So Dave's the next one. Compliance may require a significant commitment of municipal resources for evaluation, planning, and implementation. What support's available for cash-strapped cities and towns? We answered that before, and we totally agree with you. And we're not here to try to paint a rosy picture on it. We're here to try to help you comply despite this issue that I don't believe, and maybe we can talk to DEEP about this again in some of the other state agencies. I don't believe that there are tons of different sources of funding for this lying around out there. So that's a very valid comment, but in terms of answering the question about what support is available, I would say there's not a lot of additional support other than the support that's already out there, other than our educational support, which we understand is not going to get you 100% of the way towards complying with everything.
And I'll just add that I know a lot of the COGs are seeking funding on a regional basis to do some of this for communities to just sort of make it easier. So I would definitely check in with your Council of Government and see what they've got planned.
The next question is the state highway drainage system under the same requirements as the towns? There is a separate, we did not mention this, so that's a very good question. There is a separate MS4 as we understand it for the DOT. We have not seen it. We're not sure whether, I think it's in development. I think DEEP and DOT are hammering that out as we speak, so it is not completed yet, as is the one for the general permit. But yes, the DOT is going to come under an MS4, and I think that that's probably welcome news for many communities who have complained to us over the years at the NEMO program that, you know, that they're doing a bunch of stuff, but they have all these state roads creating a huge amount of runoff in their communities that apparently with impunity. So someone else is asking, is the state basically asking municipalities to inspect and monitor and enforce the general permits the state issues?
I would say no. It's more that you have to make developers and contractors aware that they have to comply, and then the compliance burden of that, those other permits, is still on DEEP or whatever other agency under those permits.
Are there any stormwater districts set up in Connecticut currently? There were 3 trial stormwater utilities that were set up by specific legislative permission, kind of as studies more than, but also as trials. None of those are currently operating. It's a long story that I don't think I could probably give a full answer. We'll give a fuller answer in our written deposition to you, all of you. I will say that we have been in contact with, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, the City of New London, who is very interested in doing a stormwater utility. And we are, and this is separate from the MS4 program. The CLEAR and the NEMO program have always been very supportive of this thing, because there has to be, as many of you pointed out, there's got to be some money to pay for this. And it's only fair and equitable, and it is being done in other places. So I think there should be more. There is, as I understand it, and maybe this is the subject of an entire webinar, there is ambiguity by many in the legal community as to whether towns have the power, right? I can't think of the phrase off the top of my head, but the authority to do these things. And that's why the few cities and towns that have tried it have done it. They've gotten kind of extra special permission from the legislature just to make sure that they've covered themselves. So that's an issue that still remains, as far as I know, unresolved. And I know the NGO community is also interested in pursuing that. Funding is the answer to poll 3 we had. It was probably true.
We intentionally left funding out because we knew everyone would respond funding is the answer.
So we had, you are able to answer funding when you go to the survey.
Yes.
About the problem was in the survey that we're doing, our initial several hundred responses were so flooded with funding as the answer that we didn't get any sub-signal. So we cheated. You caught us. You're too smart an audience. And another comment from the same person, while this may be important, it's kind of an unfunded mandate. It's untenable and irresponsible. I'm not going to comment on that one way or the other. We are not the issuers of the permit. We are being the messengers, but more than that, we're trying to be of assistance. So that's a valid perception, and I think it's one that may be widely held out there. Who's going to enforce all this while deep budgets are slashed? We cannot answer that question. Right?
No, we can't answer that. I do know that, as many of you communities know, DEEP has sort of increased their inspections that they've been doing in communities, and from what I understand, they're going to continue to do that under this new permit.
One thing we didn't do today is have a DEEP representative here, and perhaps we should have, but I think that may be fodder for another webinar. And we really wanted to focus on the permit itself and also what we're going to be able to help you with, and not so much get into some of these other issues, which are all valid issues. And we can certainly, if you write to us and fill out the survey, maybe we'll have a webinar specifically about that. Could you do a follow-up webinar, speaking of which, on each of the 6 minimum control management measures? So I assume that means you want 6 of them, and that may be, we certainly can do that. I'm not sure that we couldn't at least maybe give you 2 for the price of 1 and do 3.
You would combine them, I think, a little bit.
But I think webinars that are organized around the minimum control measures are a really good idea. We also have someone mentioning that the conservation districts are well versed on the MS4 LID and mapping and can help support municipalities as well, and that's a good comment. So the soil and water conservation districts, if you Google Connecticut SWCD, you will get your local conservation district, and they do in fact have many have expertise in this area, and so that was a group that I should have had in my little horrible slide with all the different logos on it. The districts can also help with this for sure. You might audit some of your early NEMO pilot towns as to how they're doing on the 6 minimum control measures, and since those towns' decision makers may have already drunk the non-point source Kool-Aid, sediment and all, yes. We're familiar with sediment-laden water here in our extension center. That's a good idea, and we've had a lot of turnover since the early days of NEMO, but I think in part we have done that as a subset of our LID regulations research that we did last year. So if you're interested in that, you might want to go to that story map that I mentioned, because it's got a lot of really interesting stuff about what people have done and haven't done. We have an educational edition. Circuit riders come from the circuit judges, so that's the circuit they're talking about, who used to travel from town to town to hear cases. So thank you for that. And I believe that someone had told me that, and it just slipped out of my mind.
There's other explanations for circuit rider as well.
I'm sure that if someone else can email in where the phrase obedience changes history comes from, that would be helpful. Will state institutions be able to take advantage of your outreach and technical assistance programs? Yes. How about that for an answer? Just contact us. Who is paying NEMO to provide all these useful services? It's a memorandum of understanding or agreement, I'm not sure which, with DEEP. And as you might have missed the very beginning of the webinar, it's a 5-year program, and we're going to have a full-time person on this, as well as the NEMO water team of Dave, myself, and Mike weighing in as much, and some of our geospatial experts. But it's an MOU from DEEP. When you're creating maps, we will be working with licensed surveyors. I don't think we're going to be dealing with site-level maps other than perhaps in the 4 pilot towns that we're going to be working with to work our way through this. I know that there's a long-standing conversation between the GIS world and the surveying world, but for the purposes of kind of town level and catchment level and certainly state level mapping, we're going to be dealing with state level approved GIS layers with metadata and everything else. But as far as surveyors go, that would be more appropriate if maybe some of the individual 4 towns that we work with, if they're doing something specifically on the site level. And if that doesn't answer your question correctly, give us a shout and we'll try to do that. It would be helpful to get each town a list of impaired water bodies for their town that would trigger the priority areas. It's not entirely clear from the 303D list or a CT Eco site. We agree?
Yeah.
And we will be doing that.
We're working on creating a map that allows you to click on a particular water body and see what the impairments are for that water body, and that will be part of that CT Eco map viewer that we talked about.
I'm not sure what that relates to. Timeline for the various requirements to comply with the MS4. It's a lot to go through, and as I said, we're going to have a timeline as soon as we're able to get our website up. And we already actually had an intern come in this summer and go through a timeline. Also, if you want one right away, you might check your COG. There are a few of the COGs that have also created timelines for compliance.
We also have created a Google Calendar that's dedicated to the MS4, so it has all of the deadlines in it that you can subscribe to. And again, that will be made available to you. So you can just subscribe to it and it'll just appear in your calendar.
We got a couple of compliments. Thank you. Rain gardens are infiltrators. Not sure what that means, but we try not to use the terms interchangeably. I mean, usually rain gardens, and it's a very informal division in the literature and in the practice, usually are smaller homeowner size or small institution size that don't require a whole lot of engineering or any necessarily, and that's not true always, heavy equipment or something. When we say bioretention cells, we're talking about the same exact principles but done on a larger scale that require some real engineering and usually some equipment. What happens to non-compliant towns? Just so that you know, my town's very compliant. Of course, that was the assumption. Again, we're not the regulators. We didn't want to make a big deal out of that, but we can find out the answer to that to you, and that's related to some other questions that we've gotten about enforcement. But we are not involved in that end of the equation at all, other than to try to find out the answer for you. Right, so Chris Stone from DEEP has, I think we said this, but we kind of murmured it and didn't come through, that the volume reduction that we were talking about for the, what was it, for the priority catchment, the catchments in the in priority areas is for the what's called the water quality volume, which is a technical term that's derived by an equation from the 2004 water quality manual that's in there. So not all of the volume of the runoff, but all of the water quality volume, which is a substantially less than that. And someone said, I believe industrial and commercial properties greater than 1 acre are also under an MS4. I believe that that is true in part, and we have deep people. Again, we're just getting used to the ins and outs of all the old regulations too. That it might be part of the phase 1 MS4. I don't know, Chris, if you're still there and you want to, you send us the answer. Oops. Good question. Where are we? We're almost done, folks. For those of you, let's see, how many of you are left?
65. Impressive.
Yeah, it is impressive. Does disconnecting DCIAs include disconnecting privately owned parking lots or only municipal?
Yes.
I would say yes, it does include private land, and if you can do that, that's tremendous. And that, again, that's where something like a stormwater utility would help, because there's a financial incentive that can be built in to private homeowners or not homeowners, but private landowners for disconnecting their impervious cover, because usually the rate of the charge is related to the amount of connected impervious cover. Who should be the manager of this program at the local municipality? Is it Public Works or a planning issue, or maybe even the WPCA? Nobody wants to be holding this hot potato in my town. I think it could be any of those. I have not read the section on legal authority. Does that shed any light on it, Dave?
I think there's a role for a lot of different departments in a town to play, and it's really going to be sort of a different determination for each town in terms of who takes the lead, and it may be, you know, different parts that take the lead with different parts of the permit in terms of developing the plan, or, you know, obviously the legal authorities is going to be somebody else that has to take care of that.
Yes, and I would say, though, that the changes to this regulation, just in our experience of working with towns, those with it and without in the program and not in the program, is that there probably should be a shift over. The Public Works has largely dealt with the MS4 permit, and I think, as David just mentioned, there are things now. There's more for the Public Works to do, but there are also other related items that may need some effort and expertise from other areas. And we had a good comment here, which actually I did mean to say, Dave, could you go over the most imminent deadlines real quickly?
Yeah, so basically the stormwater management plan has to be posted for public comment by April 1st of next year. So we're down to, what is it, 6 months between now and then, or 6.5 months between now and then, where you have to develop that stormwater management plan and make it available for comment. And then I forget how many, I think it's 60 days that it has to be available for public comment, and then you have 30 days to review those comments and make any changes, and then you submit your stormwater management plan to DEEP.
Someone has thanked us again, but also said send acronyms ahead of time. That's a wonderful idea. It's impossible to totally eschew acronyms in this world. We tried to show them first before we ever show them in the classic style to spell them out, but that doesn't mean that 35 slides later you're going to remember what IDDE means, and that's a very good comment. Some of these probably were referring to earlier things that we've gone through so many. We're trying to answer them all. Most towns use the engineering department to manage these permits. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say in a very fumbling way. And I guess what I was trying to imply is that it may be a little bit broader than just the engineering department. That doesn't mean that, though, that department can't manage it. They just may not be able to do all the tasks. We've got some more information for the 57 of you left on circuit riders. Methodist and Baptist preachers who traveled from tent meeting to tent meeting along the Atlantic coast during the Great Awakening period of American history were also known as circuit riders. That may account for the tone of the quote. Oops, don't read this aloud. You should have put that in the front. No, I think that I don't see why. I mean, I apologize for not reading it, for reading it aloud. I didn't see that. But so we have judges as circuit riders, but also actual preachers as circuit riders, which I think is really interesting. All right, so we're at the end. Thanks to the hardy 56 of you who are still on. As a group, you set a record for how many people we've ever had in a webinar after 4 years of these things, and also definitely a total unbreakable record for the number of questions until at least our next MS4 related webinar. So thank you very much. We will be, once again, you will get a survey link and evaluation. We will be posting this as a video eventually. That usually takes us about a week to do. And we'll be posting this as a PDF with live links to some of the resources we talked about. And we will publish answers to these questions, which I'm really sorry right now that I promised.
Oh.
But that'll be in 2025. So thanks again, and thanks for all the good input.